Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to demonstrate how to initialize a database with Python. So I'm going to open up my database demo folder with Visual Studio Code. And this was our basic process. So I'm going to grab this basic process here that we demonstrated before and create a new, and I'm going to call it dbinit.py. Now, this program isn't really meant to be run multiple times. It's really meant to run one time to initialize a database. But it's going to use the same process that we have before. So let me get rid of some of these comments since they're kind of obscuring at this point. So this is our basic process. We're going to create a connection to our database. Since we made it before, it's already there. And we saw before that it's pretty much empty. And then we create a cursor. And then in here is where we're going to work with the database with using the cursor. And what we want to do in here is we just want, in this case, what we want to do is we just want to create a table. So how do we create a table? Well, we're going to use the SQL command create table. And here they have an example. If you look at the create table command, it's like this: create table, table name, and then you put in what you want the table to be named, or what you want that column to be named, and what the data type is. Now there's several different data types, varchar, int, but for the types we really need to look at SQLite 3, because each database has different types. So I'm going to look up on the SQLite page the types, and these are the storage types that are available for SQLite. There's a null, there's an integer, there's real, text, and blob. So these are the types that we're going to end up using. And we're going to use float. Actually, they used to have float. Let's see, so we're going to use real. We'll use real, text, and integer for what we're doing here. So following the format of this, create table, and then the name of our table, and then the name, and then the type. We'll do this. We'll do the same thing. Create table. So we need to create a string for that. So we'll just say command is equal to, and I think I'm going to say command string, so we make sure it's clear that this is a string. And because this is going to be multiple lines, we're going to use triple quotes, which allows us to not worry about the formatting and having extra carriage returns. It just makes it easier. I'm going to call it TBL demo. And then we put parentheses. And inside of these parentheses, we're going to say whatever we want the name to be. num1 field is what I'm going to put. And I'm going to make it a real, which is a floating point number. num2 field, which is I'm going to make an int, and then string field, I'm going to call it text. Now, obviously, we really would want more meaningful names, but because we're just doing a demo, I'm just showing you that we can bring in all three types here. I'm going to use these just generic names here. So that's our string with our command. And then to actually we're going to send that command string to the database. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say cursor.execute and pass in that string. And then we're going to commit our cursor, and then we're going to close. So that's the process. Import SQLite 3, create a string for what you want the command to be, and it's probably a good idea to use triple quotes, either triple single quotes or triple double quotes. Basically because if we need multiple lines, it just makes it easier. And then send that command string to the database using cursor.execute. And then when you're done, commit and close it. So I'm going to run that. Let's see, I must have misspelled something. Let's try it again. Cursor dot. It's actually connection.commit. So this really need to be connection. So now we run this, and let's see if it works. Okay, so it actually executed on the last one. So let's see what we have here. We can't open it up that way, but what we can do is go here, open with default application. And there we go. There's our table demo. It's been created under tables. And we can see that it has a num1 field, a num2 field, a string field with real int and text. And we can click on it and browse the table. And we can see that we have these fields. And right now there's no data in this database. Now, we could go in here and we could manually type in our data. In fact, we could even create our database with DB browser for SQLite, and then we wouldn't need this DB in it. But we're going to initialize our data in here later on with code. So I'm going to close that, and in fact, I'm going to delete this because I want to add some more to this to initialize our database. So that shows that we can create a table. The next thing that we want to do is insert some starting data into this database with this init method. So to do that, we're going to use the insert into statement from SQL. And basically, the format for that is insert into table name values, value 1, 2, and 3. And you can find this in W3 schools. If you could look up insert into, here's the command insert into, you need whatever the name of the table is, what columns you want to insert into, what values you want to insert for those columns. So after we do that, we're going to insert starting data. And so we're going to change commands, make a new command string, and it's going to be basically like this. Insert into TBL demo num1 field. And so I'm going to just basically use these fields and then we're going to say values that we want in there, and we can put in, let's say we'll put in 1, 11, and then item 1. And let's try that. So I'm going to hit Control F5. Make sure the database is deleted because it's going to recreate it. And then let's open with default application and see what it does. I will browse the table. And let's see, it didn't show up. Let's try that again. Let's see if we need to refresh this. Oh, okay. I forgot to execute that actual command. So now let's try this. Now we'll look at it, open default application. And let's see, browse table. There we go. So you have to execute after each, you have to execute each one of these. I didn't execute the string, I just drafted the string. So there we go. We have 1.011 item 1. And so we can see these values have been inserted into the database. Now, this is num1 field, this is num2, this is string field. Notice that there's this additional number here. That's actually a index number, and SQLite will automatically add an index number for each item in your table. So that's useful to know as well. We can use that to uniquely identify each of the objects in our table. So that's how we insert things. And now if we wanted to put multiple lines in, we could do this. We could copy this code multiple times. And so I could do this, and maybe I make this 222 and item 2, and then maybe make this 333 and item 3. And this will work. In fact, I'll delete the database again and run this again. And you can see we get all of these things. Now that's fine, but it's repetitive and it's not very elegant. So maybe a more elegant way of doing this is doing it this way. We'll make a variable called starting data, which will be a tuple with multiple tuples in it. And so we'll put 1.0, 11, item 1. And so it'll be a tuple of tuples, or a sequence of sequences, basically like this. And so that's the data that we want in here. So we'll make this data structure using just regular Python. And then what we'll do is we will do a for loop for row in starting data. Let's do this. We're going to make a command string. And we want to take each of these elements and put them in here into these values. So how could we do that? Well, one temptation might be to do this, to make, hey, let's make this a format string, and we'll just insert it this way. We will just say format string, and we will say row index 0, and then the next one will be row index 1, and then this would be, it's a string, so we'll put it in here and we'll say row index 2. And in this instance, this would probably be just fine since we have everything in the database, but this is actually considered a dangerous practice from a coding perspective, because what we're doing is we are taking strings and bringing them into our command. And right now, this is a string that we provide, but what if at some point this is a string that we have the user provide? And especially if you're working with a web application later on, this creates a hazard called SQL injection. To learn more about SQL injection, a really great site to go to is bobby-tables.com. And there's this famous XKCD comic where we have this, hi, this is your son's school. We're having some computer trouble. And the mother asks, did the son break something? And he says, and the school says, did you really name your son Robert Drop Table Students question mark? And oh yes, we call our kid Little Bobby Tables. And well, we've lost this year's student records. This is actually a SQL injection attack. Basically, if what an attacker can do is enter SQL commands into, for example, you're asking the user for the name. They know that that name is going to go into a SQL query later on. And so they can try to put in a SQL injection query. In this case, they're dropping the whole table of students. And so this is kind of a joke, but it's actually a serious vulnerability with database applications. And so BobbyTables.com has provided instructions on how to avoid this for all sorts of databases and applications. So we're using Python. So let's go look at Python. And here they're telling you don't insert your elements in with a string of %s. Actually, that's with the Python DB API. We need to scroll down and find SQLite. Well, it says use a question mark with SQLite. Instead, what you do is in your cursor.execute, you provide the elements you want to insert, and then you use a placeholder. And for SQLite, the placeholder is a question mark. So what this looks like is basically this. We're just going to put question marks here inside of our string. Doing this the correct way. We're not going to do it as a format string. So we're going to put questions, and then here we can see there's parameters. And for the parameters, we're just going to put row. since this is already going to be a tuple, it's already in a sequence, we're going to take this row and and the execute command will actually put these in here and will sanitize these inputs to make sure that these inputs here, when they get inserted into this command string, do not inject any code. So this is the proper safe way of inserting your items in if you're doing it programmatically this way. So I'm going to delete this database and run it, and let's see if it worked. And it sure did. Or it looks like I've got some repetition. Oh, this needs to be here, and then these need to be removed. So for row and starting data, there's the command. Execute the command each cycle. And let's see what it looks like. There we go. Got the correct data this time. So that's a program to initialize a database. Just reviewing it, we import SQLite 3, we create our connection, we create a cursor. We have to create the table to begin with. Then, if we want to have starting data, and note, you don't always, in fact, often you don't really create starting data in a table that you're using in a program. But if you do need starting data, then you might do something like this. Create a Python data structure with your data, iterate through it, take each row and do an insert command using the question marks and the format of the execute command where you pass in some data to substitute into these question marks. And that will put all this data into that table if we want that for starting data. So you don't always have starting data, but if your application does require it, that's how you would do it. And then commit and close everything, and that's how you'd make an init method. Now, this would typically run one time, and then we wouldn't use this program maybe ever again. We would just package this starting database with our application later on. And we'll see that when we make the CRUD app. Thank you very much.